Deep within the Siberian wilderness lay an island choked by mosquitoes, offering no protection and encircled by icy, violent waters. Nazino Island was never intended to sustain life. It was meant to vanish. In 1933, under the rule of Soviet leader Joseph Stalin, the General Secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, the state initiated a ruthless campaign of internal cleansing through forced resettlement. As the Soviet Union rushed through rapid industrialization, Stalin's policies sought to purge cities of the undesirable, a deliberately vague and constantly expanding label that came to include petty offenders, political opponents, the homeless, and anyone lacking internal passports. After the April 1933 decree, entire groups were seized from major cities such as Moscow and Leningrad and branded as socially harmful elements. Most had broken no laws. Their true crime was poverty, unemployment, or displacement. Stalin's sweeping initiative, known as the Special Resettlement Project, was designed to relocate these so-called undesirables to remote regions. The vision was to build self-sufficient labor settlements across Siberia, but the scheme was catastrophically unprepared. Among the most infamous destinations was Nazino Island, remembered by its few survivors as Death Island. Situated along the Ob River in the Tomsk region, the island was a swampy, mosquito-ridden stretch of land with no infrastructure, no shelter, and no resources for survival. It was reportedly selected for its isolation and inaccessibility. Stalin's administration believed such remoteness would both prevent escape and hide the operation's brutal reality from the broader Soviet population. In May 1933, more than 6,000 people were packed onto barges and shipped to Nazino. Many had been detained at random, taken straight from the street simply for lacking documentation. They were promised work and farmland. What awaited them instead was a barren, unlivable island and complete abandonment. Nazino was not merely the result of poor planning, it stood as a physical manifestation of a regime that treated human life as disposable, a desolate wasteland chosen precisely to erase all evidence of those left struggling to survive. When the prisoners arrived on Nazino Island in May 1933, there was no settlement waiting for them. What they encountered was an uninhabitable expanse of mud and swamp. There were no structures, no dry ground, and no system for food distribution. What began as a bureaucratic failure rapidly turned into a humanitarian catastrophe. The deportees included former factory laborers, students, peasants displaced by collectivization, and many women, some barely in their early 20s. A large number had been arrested solely for lacking internal passports, often meaning they were homeless or without work. Women were not separated from men. In fact, there were no divisions of any kind. Thousands were forced off the barges and left exposed in the open, surrounded by freezing waters and clouds of mosquitoes. Flour was the only food provided. It was dumped in sacks along the riverbank, with no guidance and no tools to prepare it. Prisoners attempted to mix it with river water into a crude paste, but many choked or suffered deadly intestinal blockages. Others tried to cook it over improvised fires, yet dry wood was almost impossible to find. As the hours dragged on, hunger intensified, and fights over meager flour rations turned brutal. Anyone caught stealing was either beaten by guards or punished by being tied to trees, left for hours at the mercy of the elements. For women, the suffering carried an extra dimension of cruelty. Lacking any protection, many became targets not only of fellow prisoners but also of camp guards. Some were coerced into degrading acts in return for bread or a false promise of safety. Later testimonies revealed that younger women were routinely taken away by guards during the night. Official records that survived, most notably the 1933 memorandum written by Soviet investigator Vasily Welchko, later confirmed that this abuse was systematic. Women endured the same starvation and exposure as men, yet often faced even harsher treatment simply because of their gender. As despair deepened, social norms disintegrated. The living stripped clothing from the dead. Bodies that washed ashore after failed escape attempts were scavenged. The strong preyed on the weak. Illness spread unchecked. Conditions worsened as prisoners drank directly from a polluted river. There were no latrines, and no medical care existed. As days turned into weeks, all moral structure collapsed. Eyewitness accounts, later gathered during Soviet investigations, recorded acts of cannibalism. With no food and no hope of rescue, some prisoners resorted to consuming the dead. There were also verified cases of murder, where victims were killed specifically to be eaten. These accounts were not hearsay. Velkasa's 1933 report included direct interviews with both guards and survivors who spoke openly about what occurred. Soviet authorities later acknowledged these findings internally but concealed them from the public. Attempts to escape the island almost always ended in death. The Ob River's currents were unforgiving. Those who tried to swim to shore were either pulled away by the water or shot by patrols along the banks. Guards were ordered to prevent any movement beyond the camp, yet had no resources to offer aid. Even soldiers assigned to Nazino later described the experience as nightmarish, with some reportedly traumatized by what they witnessed. Nazino Island was never designed to sustain human life. There were no tools, no organization, no leadership. What unfolded was not a simple logistical failure. It was the outcome of policies that placed ideology above survival and bureaucracy above humanity. The suffering inflicted on the island's inhabitants, particularly women, stands as one of the most horrific episodes of Stalin's internal exile campaigns. The Nazino disaster was not an accident of mismanagement. It was the consequence of a system that stripped its own people of humanity in pursuit of ideological domination. It revealed the Soviet regime's chilling capacity to destroy lives without trial or mercy, and then erase those lives from history. What happened on that frozen island in 1933 was more than mass death. It was intentional oblivion. How do states erase their crimes while still using them to enforce obedience? Share your thoughts in the comments. As Soviet investigator Vasily Velitko wrote in his suppressed 1933 report, people died like flies. Their bodies were eaten. Yes,